Do you think he's altered his appearance at all?
Again, I don't know.
Have you sighted him at all anywhere? Have there been any reliable reports?
No.
After more than 50 years of unanswered questions, the shadow of Lord Lucan's disappearance has finally been pierced by science, and the truth is darker than anyone imagined. DNA evidence has confirmed what investigators, historians, and the public long suspected. Lucan might not have died right after the brutal murder of Sandra Rivet, his family's trusted nanny, on that fateful night in Belgravia. Once a ghostly figure of aristocratic intrigue, Lucan's vanishing act has now collided with modern forensics, exposing decades of mystery, deception, and evasion. For Rivet's family, the revelation is both vindication and renewed anguish. For the world, it challenges everything we thought we knew about privilege, impunity, and the chilling reach of a man who disappeared into legend. The crime that shook Britain. On the night of November 7, 1974, the elegant facades of Belgravia's Georgian townhouses concealed a horror that would grip Britain for decades. At 46 Lower Belgrave Street, a home synonymous with wealth, status, and cultivated refinement, the ordinary rhythms of domestic life were abruptly and violently shattered. Sandra Rivet, a 29-year-old nurse and nanny devoted to the Lucan children, had descended the narrow staircase to the basement kitchen to prepare a simple cup of tea. She could not have anticipated that her routine task would place her directly in the path of a brutal, calculated attack. In an instant, the air of calm was destroyed. She was struck by an intruder wielding a lead pipe wrapped in protective plaster, a weapon as improvised as it was sinisterly deliberate. The blows landed with horrifying precision, leaving her gravely wounded before she could mount any defense. The violence was both personal and terrifyingly methodical, suggesting forethought and malice rather than a random outburst. Above stairs, Lady Veronica Lucan arrived home, unaware of the nightmare unfolding below. Within moments, she too was under attack. Severe head injuries and contusions left her dazed and bleeding, hair matted with blood, her face a mask of shock and pain. Every instinct screamed for survival. Despite the physical and psychological assault, she summoned extraordinary courage, breaking free from the grasp of her attacker and fleeing into the cold November night. Her frantic screams echoed along the cobbled streets of Belgravia, rousing neighbors and piercing the silence of the affluent district. Within hours, detectives had pieced together a chilling profile of the assailant. Their suspicions fell squarely on Lord Richard John Bingham, 7th Earl of Lucan, a man whose polished aristocratic demeanor masked a life of mounting personal and financial pressure. Lucan, renowned for his high-stakes gambling at John Aspinall's exclusive Clermont Club, had cultivated a lifestyle that combined glamour and risk, charm and recklessness. Investigators believed he possessed both the motive and the opportunity to commit such a violent crime. Yet when authorities arrived to apprehend him, Lucan had vanished without a trace. In an instant, the figure who had once moved effortlessly among Britain's elite had disappeared, leaving behind a grieving family, a murdered employee, and a nation in shock. The case exploded across newspapers and television screens, becoming a media sensation. Public fascination was fueled by the striking contrast between Lucan's carefully maintained public persona and the violent act ascribed to him. For the aristocracy and ordinary citizens alike, reconciling the image of a polished, charming peer with that of a premeditated killer was almost impossible. A man who had orchestrated the death of a trusted employee, attacked his wife, and then vanished into the ether, became the focus of a story that was as much about class, privilege, and secrecy as it was about murder. By nightfall, Belgravia had transformed from a quiet enclave of London's elite into the epicenter of one of the most notorious mysteries in British history, a violent act that would ripple across decades, blending crime, intrigue, and the enduring enigma of Lord Lucan's disappearance. The search and the silence. Lucan's disappearance ignited one of the most frantic and far-reaching manhunts in modern British history. Within hours of his vanishing, police mobilized across London, scrutinizing ports, airports, and railway stations, searching for any sign of the missing Earl. Rumors and tips poured in from around the globe, some credible, many not, and investigators pursued every lead with painstaking diligence. From the gilded lobbies of Hong Kong's luxury hotels to the quiet hamlets of Devon, from the crowded streets of Bombay to remote outposts in Australia, Lucan's supposed movements became a patchwork of elusive sightings. Yet, despite the efforts, each trail dissipated into obscurity, leaving frustration and uncertainty in its wake. Over time, the case became emblematic of investigative impotence and obsession. Reporters, private detectives, and amateur sleuths found themselves ensnared in a labyrinth of conflicting testimonies, false sightings, and deliberate misdirections. Some accounts painted him as a ghostly wanderer, a man who had assumed multiple identities, moving quietly among ordinary citizens and blending seamlessly into unfamiliar communities. Others suggested he had found safe harbor with sympathetic members of the aristocracy, protected by loyalty, connections, or fear. A conspiracy, real or imagined, that allowed a man accused of murder to vanish with near-perfect impunity. Each alleged sighting, each whispered story, reignited public fascination. Letters, diary entries, and photographs became clues in a case that seemed to defy resolution. Yet the more the world searched, the more Lucan became mythic, a phantom lurking just out of reach, a man as enigmatic as the crime he was accused of committing. By 1999, the law had officially declared him legally dead, and his estate and title passed to his son, George Bingham. Yet even with that legal closure, the essential question endured. Had Lord Lucan truly perished in obscurity, or had he meticulously orchestrated his disappearance to evade justice, living beyond the reach of law while the world speculated? From the streets of Belgravia to the far corners of the globe, the Lucan case had evolved into more than a murder investigation. It became a decades-spanning enigma, a study in identity, privilege, and the extremes one man might pursue to escape accountability. Its power lay not only in the shocking violence of November 7, 1974, but in the enduring, unanswerable questions it left behind. Questions that continue to haunt historians, criminologists, and the public imagination alike. Secrets of the Lucan household. Behind the polished veneer of aristocratic elegance, the Lucan household concealed a simmering darkness. Lady Veronica Lucan later recounted a marriage that was far from idyllic, a life marked not by affection, but by isolation, manipulation, and relentless pressure. Richard John Bingham, the 7th Earl of Lucan, exuded charm and sophistication in public, yet within the walls of 46 Lower Belgrave Street, that same poise masked an unpredictable, often menacing temperament. Lucan's compulsive gambling was central to the household's tension. He spent lavishly at John Aspinall's exclusive Claremont Club, participating in high-stakes baccarat and other elite games, cultivating an image of effortless wealth while simultaneously accumulating debts that imperiled his family's financial security. Luxury and risk were inseparable in the Lucan home. Private zoos, opulent European vacations, and glamorous social events served as a fragile facade, concealing mounting instability. But the peril was not only monetary. Lady Lucan described a pattern of psychological abuse and intermittent physical intimidation, carefully calibrated to maintain control and instill fear. He would oscillate between charm and aggression, leaving those around him uncertain when the next outburst would occur. The grandeur of their Georgian townhouse, the sweeping staircases, the immaculate decor, the curated art, belied a sense of foreboding. The house itself became a stage where privilege intersected with threat. Amid this turbulence, Sandra Rivette, the Lucan children's devoted nurse, emerged as a stabilizing presence. Competent, perceptive, and fiercely protective of the children, she provided a rare constant in a household defined by unpredictability. Yet her proximity to the escalating volatility made her vulnerable. Lady Lucan would later reveal that Lucan meticulously planned the attack that claimed Sandra's life. The lead pipe used in the murder, wrapped in plaster to prevent splintering and maximize impact, was emblematic of a man thinking several steps ahead, methodical in his violence. Lady Lucan's recollections paint a chilling portrait, a man capable of blending charisma with calculated menace, aware of the consequences, yet driven by a compulsion to assert control. The murder of Sandra Rivette was not a spontaneous act of passion, but the tragic culmination of mounting domestic instability, financial pressure, and premeditated cruelty. The Lucan household, outwardly glamorous, had become a crucible of fear, a setting that would not only precipitate murder, but also catalyze a decades-long enigma. Why had Lord Lucan descended into madness that night? Was it a crime of passion or something far worse? The custody wars and the motive for murder. By 1974, the once glittering facade of the Lucan marriage had utterly collapsed. What had begun as a union of wealth, charm, and high society had descended into bitterness, estrangement, and open hostility. At the center of the conflict were the Lucan children. Veronica, Lady Lucan, had petitioned for sole custody after witnessing the scary, unhinged behavior of her husband following yet another loss during his gambling escapades, and had decided to take drastic measures in order to protect her children from their volatile father. Veronica was granted custody after a bruising legal struggle, a decision that struck at the very core of Lord Lucan's pride and identity. For a man raised in privilege and accustomed to control, losing authority over his family was a humiliation he could not accept. Lucan's campaign to overturn the decision was relentless. In court and in private, he portrayed Lady Lucan as unstable, erratic, and unfit to care for their children. His allies in London's elite circles echoed his claims, whispering about her fragile mental health and volatile temperament. But the court saw through his performance. The custody ruling remained in Lady Lucan's favor, leaving Lucan increasingly embittered and obsessed with regaining control. It was in this toxic climate that his behavior darkened. Friends of Lady Lucan recalled her growing paranoia, though it was hardly paranoia at all. She had reported being followed, her movements watched, her phone calls disturbed by heavy silence on the other end of the line. Investigators would later conclude that Lucan was stalking his estranged wife, carefully studying her habits and waiting for the moment to strike. The motive was chillingly clear. If Lady Lucan were removed, Lucan could reclaim his children and perhaps restore his shattered reputation. Whether he imagined it as a desperate bid for redemption or as coldly calculated murder is unknown. What is certain is that he planned meticulously. The weapon, a length of lead pipe wrapped in plaster, was not the instrument of a frenzied outburst, but of premeditated violence, designed to inflict maximum damage while leaving him unharmed. But fate intervened in a way Lucan had not foreseen. On the evening of November 7, 1974, as Sandra Rivet, the family's devoted nanny, descended into the basement kitchen to make a cup of tea, she entered the space where Lucan lay in wait. In the dim light, it's believed that he mistook her for his wife. Veronica was supposed to be home that night, while Sandra hadn't been scheduled in attendance. She had been called in at the last minute, and this fateful coincidence would soon end her life. The blows came swiftly, mercilessly. Sandra collapsed, fatally injured, an innocent victim caught in the crosshairs of Lucan's obsession and rage. When Lady Lucan returned and was herself attacked moments later, she narrowly escaped with her life, bloodied and terrified, fleeing into the London night to raise the alarm. By then, the Earl of Lucan had crossed a line from which there was no return. His plan to regain control of his family had ended not in triumph, but in brutal tragedy, setting in motion the most enduring mystery in modern British crime. The breakthrough that shocked Britain. For half a century, the disappearance of Lord Lucan had been fertile ground for speculation, a mystery that seemed destined never to be solved. Theories multiplied with every passing year. Some insisted he had taken his own life, drowning in the cold waters of the English Channel on the night of the murder, overwhelmed by remorse. Others believed his vast gambling debts had caught up with him, that London's criminal underworld had silenced him to settle scores. More romantically inclined voices were certain he had slipped abroad, sheltered by an invisible web of aristocratic allies who considered him untouchable, a man above the law. But in early 2025, that tapestry of speculation was abruptly torn apart. The case, long considered cold, was jolted violently back to life. Neil Berriman, Sandra Rivet's son, revealed that a modern forensic review had uncovered startling evidence that overturned decades of assumption. By re-examining fingerprints and biological traces preserved from the 1970s, investigators were able to apply touch DNA and advanced fingerprint matching technologies unavailable to earlier detectives. Neil Berriman said, "Many of you have raised questions about DNA evidence in recent months, and I want to address this directly. Some have wondered whether it's possible to obtain DNA from a fingerprint. The answer is yes, it can be done. And the results suggested something extraordinary. Lord Lucan had not perished in 1974, but had lived on, undetected, for years afterward. This is shocking, and yet that's what science suggested. The implications were seismic. This was not simply confirmation that Lucan had been present at the crime scene, something already widely believed, but rather that he had evaded capture and continued to exist long after many had written him into the grave. For a man whose legend had grown from mystery, this revelation redefined the narrative. Lucan had not vanished into the fog of history, but into the fabric of another life, hiding in plain sight. The announcement landed like a thunderclap. Media outlets scrambled to reframe the story, while criminologists and historians questioned how a man of such notoriety could have concealed himself for decades. Theories of suicide and underworld retribution now looked fragile, if not entirely false. Instead, a darker, more unsettling possibility emerged: that Lucan had been aided in his escape, his aristocratic privilege granting him a shield of silence and complicity. For Sandra Rivett's family, the discovery was both vindication and agony. They had always believed Lucan guilty of her murder, but this evidence suggested he had also succeeded in mocking justice, living out his final years as a fugitive while their lives remained defined by loss. The revelation was more than forensic progress. It was a national shockwave, a reminder that one of Britain's most notorious figures may have spent decades breathing the same air as those who searched for him, silently rewriting history by his mere survival. The fallout and the unanswered questions. The breakthrough did more than revive a cold case. It shattered the mythology that had grown around Lord Lucan. If he had indeed lived past 1974, then every neat explanation, his supposed suicide in the Channel, whispered stories of a mafia-style execution, even romantic notions of a doomed aristocrat too proud to face disgrace, crumbled into dust. What remained was a more unsettling truth. Britain's most infamous fugitive had not vanished into legend, but had instead slipped through the cracks, living in the shadows while Sandra Rivett's family endured decades of grief without resolution. Legal experts immediately filled television studios and news columns with debate. Could justice still be served? If Lucan was alive, he would now be well into his 90s, frail, perhaps incapacitated, but still legally accountable. Would it be moral or even possible to put such a man on trial? Others argued that even if he had died in obscurity, the principle remained. A crime had been committed, and the privilege that had allowed him to escape demanded exposure. The question of prosecution became less about punishment and more about the accountability of a system that had failed so spectacularly. The public reaction was swift, visceral, and divided. For some, the revelation brought a grim satisfaction, confirmation that Lucan had indeed been guilty all along. But for many more, it was cause for outrage. Headlines denounced the aristocratic safety net that had allowed him to disappear, an invisible wall of wealth, connections, and silence that shielded him from capture. What once appeared as a tragic mystery now looked more like a conspiracy of privilege, in which the rules of justice bent under the weight of social standing. For Sandra Rivett's family, the moment was one of bittersweet reckoning. At last, forensic science had confirmed what they had always known in their hearts. Lucan was the killer, and he had eluded justice, not by fate, but by design. Yet this vindication came with fresh wounds. Proof of his survival meant that for years, possibly decades, he had walked free, his life continuing while Sandra's was violently cut short. The hope of a courtroom confrontation, of watching him answer for his crimes, was gone. Justice, once again, remained just out of reach. But Neil Berriman, Sandra's son, won't give up until the truth is out. I remain committed to exploring every avenue to bring closure and justice to my mother's memory, he said. Berriman was adopted as a baby and only found out his mother was the Sandra Rivett when he was 40 years old. When it was confirmed Sandra was my birth mother, I fell into complete shock and could not believe somebody would do this to her. I was cross, angry, and wanted that man caught. Still, 50 years later, the Lucan mystery stood at a paradoxical crossroads, solved and unsolved at once. His guilt was undeniable, his escape confirmed, yet his ultimate fate remained obscured. Had he died quietly abroad, under another name, with no one daring to expose him? Or had he simply vanished deeper into history, his aristocratic allies ensuring silence until the end? What lingered most was not just the mystery of his disappearance, but the haunting reminder of how power can warp justice. Lord Lucan was no longer merely a man who vanished. He was a symbol of privilege, secrecy, and deception. A cautionary tale about what happens when the powerful are allowed to slip beyond the law's reach. The final twist. Just as investigators and the public began to digest the seismic implications of the DNA breakthrough, another revelation sent shockwaves through the case. Many of the decades-long sightings of Lord Lucan were false leads, carefully constructed or entirely imagined. Most startling among these was the case of a man living in Australia under the alias Derek Crowther, who had been reported by locals and former acquaintances as exhibiting aristocratic manners and behaviors strikingly reminiscent of Lucan. Further investigation revealed that Crowther was, in fact, Christopher Newman, a known imposter with a history of assuming the identities of prominent individuals. His presence had generated decades of speculation, misleading investigators and the public alike. For years, newspaper stories, amateur sleuth reports, and even law enforcement tips had treated sightings of Crowther as credible Lucan encounters, adding layers of confusion to an already convoluted case. In effect, Newman's deception had cast a long shadow over every reported sighting, creating false trails across continents, from the pubs of South Africa to remote towns in South America, each reigniting hope and then disappointment. This revelation underscored a profound truth. The historical record of Lucan's disappearance is riddled with gaps, misdirection, and deliberate obscuration. He had been smart enough to hide in plain sight for all those years, much to his victims' families' disgust. But where could he have been? How did no one notice him? What did he do to survive? While Berryman's DNA evidence provided the first incontrovertible proof linking Lucan to the murder of Sandra Rivet, it also highlighted the fragile nature of memory, the dangers of assumption, and the ease with which identities can be manipulated. Even with scientific clarity, a full reconstruction of Lucan's fate remained elusive. The murder of Sandra Rivet and Lucan's vanishing continue to captivate criminologists, historians, and the public alike. The story intertwines aristocratic privilege, premeditated violence, obsession with wealth and status, and decades of unanswered questions, creating a narrative as compelling as any fiction. Despite modern forensic breakthroughs, the case remains a haunting reminder that some mysteries, no matter how close to resolution, may never be fully solved. And that sometimes, much to our dismay, the villain does manage to get away. Lucan's story, part crime, part legend, continues to loom over Britain's collective imagination, a chilling testament to ambition, deception, and the enduring consequences of unchecked power. How many other cases just like his exist without our knowledge? What can we do about it? For the Rivet and Lucan families, these questions might remain forever elusive. And for the rest of the world, this mystery will endure over time, at least until Lord Lucan's remains are found once and for all. What do you think about this shocking new discovery and the following results? Where do you think he would have lain in plain sight? Let us know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Until next time.